Hello, my friends, and welcome to Perfect Practice. Today, we have a very unique topic of interest, which is all about emotional eating. This is something that definitely impacts your practice. It might even impact you personally because we all eat and we all have emotions, and sometimes they crisscross and overlap, and one impacts the other. We've seen this over and over with our clients. We give them the perfect meal plan, so to speak, and they might follow it for a day or two, a week or two, or a month or two. But then sometimes we find that they regress, and it may have nothing to do with the way the food tastes. It may have nothing to do with even how good they feel on that diet. However, sometimes there's emotions that boil to the surface, or experiences that people have around food that influence the decisions that they make about what they're going to put into their body. So today with me, I have a dear friend, somebody who I've known for many years, who's guaranteed to put a smile on your face, certainly puts a smile on my face every time we talk. And that's Tricia Nelson. Tricia is a emotional eating expert. She runs the company Heal Your Hunger. She founded it as a result of her own emotional eating challenges. And as a result of that, she's helped hundreds and hundreds of people resolve this issue so that they can live their best life and not be controlled by food. And food is medicine. However, if we're eating for the wrong reasons, that same food and the food that goes into our mouths can poison us, as many of you probably realize. So if you're a practitioner and you're struggling with your own eating issues, today will benefit you. However, it'll really benefit you to understand how your patients are impacted by emotional eating and help you kind of get a window into what's going through their hearts, what's going through their minds, and what they're experiencing, so that if we can help them overcome that challenge, or you can use Tricia's expertise to help them overcome that challenge, they can live a much better quality of life. So without further ado, Tricia, welcome. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me, Sachin. It's a real honor and pleasure.
Well, it's always great to chat with you. And today we get to kind of bring your expertise and share it with a group of practitioners. And of course, the conversation is going to be a little bit different than perhaps a conversation you have if we're presenting this to our clients. And one of the things that I love about you, and for the practitioners listening to this, Tricia is more than happy to come and speak to your communities as well. So if you've got a community of people, um, and you want to do a webinar with her, or if you want to do a training with her, then this could be a great opportunity and a great individual to reach out to, because I'm not an expert in emotional eating. However, we bring Tricia into our community because she is an expert, so that she can guide our community and guide our clients who are struggling with those challenges. So I just wanted to put that out there, because some of you might be thinking, I know my clients have this problem, but I'm not an expert in this. Who can help me? Another thing to note is that Tricia also runs a coaching program for practitioners. And so we may talk about that a little bit today, but before we do, let's get into what is emotional eating. Let's create an operating definition for it.
Beautiful. Thank you for that. I was a former emotional eater. I'm not cured, so I could easily do it again. but but I am healed by the grace of God. Just it's a daily thing, and I'm grateful. I follow what I do, what I teach people, which has served me for several decades. So emotional eating is really eating out of an emotional need, eating in response to strong emotions, and eating to mitigate our emotions, to not feel our emotions, to stuff them down. So it's literally stuffing emotions. And it can, like, there's a lot of misconceptions about it. Like, it's not necessarily an overweight person who's an emotional eater. Like, you can be underweight, and if you're restricting or doing these strange practices around food, regurgitation, or orthorexia, or whatever, that can be motivated by emotions as well. Obviously, bulimia, anorexia, these things are motivated by a desire to change how we feel. So that's the most simple thing, is changing how we feel through food. It is, probably predominantly people who struggle with food and weight. So for me, for instance, I was 50 pounds overweight. I struggled with my weight. I went on many diets. My weight was up and down because diets didn't work for me. So I do a diet and like by hook or by crook and follow the plan, but then I couldn't keep it going, and so then I'd let go of the ability to control what I was eating, and I'd go right back up the scale. And I'm sure people watching will have had that experience with so many patients, the yo-yo dieting. That was certainly me. So typically it is people who struggle with food and weight, emotional eaters. And, I really consider this to be a spectrum of, I use the term emotional eating because I think it's the best umbrella term, meaning it's, there's lots of different things you do with food, perhaps if you have disordered eating, but to me, it's all motivated by emotions. That's why emotional eating is such a good catch-all term. But definitely food addiction. I was food addicted. And if you look at the classic signs of addiction signs of addiction, like not being able to stop once you start. Obviously, we're not talking about eating in general. We're talking about eating primarily sugar and processed carbohydrates. That's the thing people binge on the most. That's what they feel out of control with. It's typically not carrot sticks and celery. So it's, it's more it's ooey, I call it the ooey gooey chewy foods, right? The yummy foods. And so and honestly, that's what works. Like if you're looking to stop feeling, you're going to get the heavier, denser, carb rich foods because it will stop you from feeling intense emotions, whereas celery sticks and carrot sticks won't. So that's where we're drawn to the heavier foods. I mean, there's other reasons. There's serotonin effect and other things as well. Sugar is highly addictive physically. I was addicted to sugar. So there's physical reasons why we're drawn to those foods. But from where I sit and the people I work with, it gets you there fastest. It gets you to stop feeling intense feelings the fastest. And that's the goal subconsciously. Nobody ever says, where's the chocolate? I want to stop feeling my feelings. Like that doesn't happen. It's a craving for chocolate. And when I first started trying to do something about my weight problem, I believed I just liked food. So as a practitioner, you might hear a patient say, emotional eater, I just like food. Whereas with some more understanding and exposure to a conversation about emotional eating, they might start to say, oh, yeah, I eat to feel better. I eat to feel better. And so that was true for me. I just like food until I realized I'm not the same as my friends, and I use the example of when I would go to Denny's or some kind of, 24-hour IHOP or some kind of like easy burger joint, whatever. I would, order a sandwich and it would come with fries, as would my friends. They would eat their sandwich and pick up their fries, French fries, I'm talking about. I would eat my fries and pick up my sandwich. So again, the carb, the greasy, the carby, right? The highly processed foods. These are the things I'd eat first because they were the yummiest to me. So anyway, bottom line is the foods we're drawn to are heavy and rich. And sometimes physically addictive, like sugar and processed carbs. Once I started, it was hard to stop. I wouldn't eat a few fries. I'd eat all the fries. And I would look at my friends and be like, how can they leave a French fry on their plate? Like that makes or a pile of French fries. Like that's the best part. So like I would eat until they're done. Similarly, a bag of chips, I would fool myself that I'm going to eat just a handful, but before I knew it, they were gone. So it's the inability to stop once you start. That's a classic sign of addiction. You also do it to your peril. As practitioners, you've told your patients if you keep on with this diet or if you don't lose weight, you're looking at some serious health consequences, diabetes, pre-diabetes, autoimmune issues, heart disease, I mean, blockage, right? There's all these things that can happen and they'll do it anyway. And you'll scratch your head and you'll be like, that's insane. Like, that's insane. Like they're going to die. They're going to get a foot amputated if they keep eating that sugar, but they'll do it anyway. So again, a classic sign of addiction. You do it in spite of negative consequences. Also, you do it and then you don't get the same hit, right? That it doesn't light up the reward center in your brain the way it did initially. So you have to have more.
Mm.
Classic sign of addiction, right? Tolerance. And then you need more to get the same effect. So it's amazing how along the same lines and aligned this can be with other addictions. And it seems weird because it's food that you have to eat, but that just means it's all the more reason why we have to intervene and help these people, because you can't just stop doing it, right? You can't put the plug in the jug like you can with alcohol. So we're talking about a real addictive habit. And for those patients who have been struggling with food and weight, I'd say for maybe more than 10 years, it's an addictive habit,
Mm.
and you can call it an addiction. They might be like that's harsh, whatever, but let's call it an addictive habit where you can stop it for a time, but you'll start back up. If you don't deal with the emotional connection, right, to food, you'll be following the diet and then falling off the diet time and time again.
Thank you. What's interesting to note, like I was researching this topic before our call, and the NIH did a study in February 2023, and they found that 43.5% of people with eating disorders are obese. But this is what really fascinated me: 33.5% of people with emotional eating disorder are 33.5% are normal weight, and 18.4% are underweight. So there's more people that are normal weight or underweight that have emotional eating disorder than people who are obese. So we might not be able to look at someone and know that this is happening because it may not physically show up when we look at them. And there might be even like here, almost 20% of people who have emotional eating disorders, they're actually underweight. So we would never even suspect that. But what's really important, I think, to understand in all of this is there's some sort of pain or some sort of issue that they might be trying to resolve through food because it changes the chemistry in the body. I'm curious from your perspective, if you've come across research on this, how much of this is nature versus nurture? Because I know when you study addiction, there are some people genetically more prone to addiction than others. So is there a genetic component to emotional eating that you found?
Well, I always like to start with my own personal experience on this, and there certainly was. My parents both were chubby as kids, so they had a weight issue, which means their bodies reacted, right, didn't metabolize normally, if you will, and they gained weight easily. So guess what? I gain weight easily. My sisters, all three of us were 3 for 3 for having eating disorders. So we all can gain weight easily. So there is that genetic component. I mean, if you have two obese parents, you're obviously predisposed to having obesity as well. So the genetics are there. Regarding food behaviors that are aberrant, I mean, definitely we're looking at nurture as well. If you grow up with a snacker or your parents are eating junk food, you're going to eat junk food too, obviously. And so and that's going to be a problem. Now my mom was fairly healthy, even though both my parents lost weight at some point. They went on the Pritikin diet in the 80s and they lost weight and kept it off. But my mom was fairly healthy, but I still ended up as a junk food junkie. I
Mhm.
still wanted the carbs and the sugar. And in terms of the nurture as well, there is no question trauma plays its own part. For instance, I had sexual abuse as a child from a relative. Many of my clients have been sexually abused. There's other kinds of abuse, physical abuse as well. So, I mean, I don't have any doubt that having had sexual abuse, it contributed to my wanting to cover up my body with food and fat.
Mm.
And it was when you're a kid, you don't have too many coping tools available to you, and food is one of the few that you have. So eating is going to be right there as the thing you can reach for to deal, right, to cope. with whatever pain you're in, for sure. And I want to mention something, Sachin, which is the primary, what I've identified as the three primary motivators or drivers of emotional eating. Just to kind of simplify it, oversimplify it, it's called the PEP formula or the PEP test. And it's an acronym, PEP. The first P stands for painkiller, because I find that we eat to kill emotional pain. And to an emotional eater who's been medicating with food, they've been doing it a long time. So everything's painful. Everything that's uncomfortable is essentially painful, right? Like you change schools as a kid. Well, that's hard. You get teased. That's hard. As an adult, you change jobs. That's hard. You get divorced. That's hard. Like it all feels like pain. Like strong emotions feel like pain. So we eat as a painkiller. The E stands for escape. We eat to escape and I say our minds. Overeaters tend to be overthinkers, or people with eating disorders. It can be undereaters as well. We have racing minds typically more than your average person. So we overthink everything. And then we want to escape our own minds because it's such a, zoo up there. And so eating, again, that serotonin effect of carbs and sugar, it calms us down. It calms us down and it distracts us from our overactive minds and fearful minds. I think as emotional eaters, we tend to be more anxious and fearful with circumstances of life. And so eating just kind of helps us feel no pain and get out of the scary thoughts. I call it the awfulizing. As you see, I use very clinical terms for the way that I speak about this. And then the last P in PEP is punishment. And this is a little bit harder to understand, or it's not intuitive, because we eat for reward. So it's like punishment. I'm not punishing myself, but emotional eaters are super sensitive to feeling bad and guilty. We are super sensitive folks. And so we feel bad about everything. And so we do use food as a punishment, and it's built in. If you binge to kill pain and get out of your, busy head, you will ultimately feel bad as well, because it sucks to overeat and then have zits on your face and bloat from the night before. So there's a built-in punishment, but I use the PEP as a very oversimplified way of saying these are some primary emotional drivers of why we're reaching for food, for people to just start understanding kind of how emotions are involved in all this.
Thank you. Another question that comes up for me is having a young son myself. And I know a lot of these behaviors can potentially start in childhood. I noticed that a lot of parents use food to soothe their children. And so when they're crying, they hurt themselves, they use food to alleviate pain, and they use food to celebrate victory as well.
Yeah.
So how much of a role does that play in adults? Is that something that translates into adulthood that you found into emotional eating?
Yeah, I mean, again, if parents do that like instinctively for themselves, the kids are going to pick up on that. But then in the role of parenting, it can be an easy go-to, right? Like we're gonna change this behavior, and the quickest way to do that is to give them a reward or a punishment, and doing it around food is immediate and effective. Oftentimes. So it's no wonder, and it's nothing anybody should feel bad about or beat themselves up about as a parent, but to be conscious of it and to realize, maybe there's some other mechanisms we can employ here. So food isn't always set up as a reward for good behavior or punishment, the removal of it as punishment for bad behavior. I think just as parents being more conscious of how we're using food and speaking about food, I think that's important. And I think taking it off the table as the reward is important, or at least minimizing it is important. And it's not that you're going to give your kid an eating disorder if you're like, okay, you won the game, we're going to go out for ice cream. Like that doesn't, it's not going to translate to an eating disorder. But I think it's just in general, just upping our consciousness as parents to the way food's being used. Is it, are we speaking about it as something that nourishes, fortifies, strengthens our bodies? Or is it used, as leverage, right? And as a chip on the bargaining table.
I love that. Given the fact that over 50% of people with emotional eating disorders are of normal weight, are there certain questions we can ask or certain telltale signs that as clinicians we can identify? Maybe there's questions we can add to our form that can help us clue into this. I'd love your insights on that.
Yeah, and you just reminded me, I have a cool kind of handout that we can provide for people that's like 50 different questions you can ask.
Mm.
And so you can pick some of them and add them to an evaluation form. But I'll give you some good ones. I mean, I have on my own quiz on my website, which people are welcome to take to see how that works. But things like, how often do you overindulge? Like how often do you go overboard when you're eating sugar and carbs? Do you eat to the point of feeling stuffed? Okay. Have you ever tried to vomit like after you've eaten? Something I ask on my quiz, which might not be appropriate for somebody else's. It's just that people come to my website typically are emotional eaters. But I ask something about getting food out of the garbage. My TEDx talk, I start with the scenario of throwing binge foods out and then retrieving them later when I have more room in my stomach, so that's, eating food out of the garbage is not, it's not a pretty treat, and people typically don't want to cop to it. That's why I put it in my TEDx talk, because so many people do it and then think they're the only ones. But other things like, do you constantly think about, like, how often do you think about food? Is it a constant thing? Does it feel like an obsession? How often do you think about your body size? Are you happy with your body size? Are you, how many times have you dieted? How many times have you blown your diet? These kinds of things, feeling out of control around food, preoccupied with food. Again, addicted to sugar, like how much of your diet is carb rich. Do you like vegetables? I mean, emotional eaters typically aren't big fans. I mean, they'll eat vegetables, but that's just really a means to the end, which is carbs and sugar. So or a lot of people who are normal weight, they'll eat healthy 90% of the time. I mean, this is true for a lot of health coaches. Like they'll eat healthy 90% of the time, and then there's 10% where they're off the rails and they feel so guilty because they're telling other people how to eat, right? And then they have this dark secret, which is they binge. So asking people about their, like, do they binge? That can be a question too. But we can provide that handout for people for sure.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I think that'd be really helpful to add that
Yeah,
to our form so that we could speak into it, right?
yeah.
And let people know that we're in at least informed in these areas and we can empathize and perhaps support them further if
Well,
we're identifying that.
100%. And I want to speak to that because there is such a sense of shame, obviously, as emotional eaters and food addicts, or bulimics, whatever version of it. But there's so much shame around it. And it's so good for practitioners to be informed about this because it's easy to overlook, especially if somebody isn't overweight. But I think knowing about this is important. Having resources obviously is important. And if you haven't ever had this problem yourself, it's going to be hard to understand it because it is really crazy behavior, especially when you've been told, this, and this consequence will ensue if you keep doing what you're doing, and they'll do it anyway. So it's hard to understand the behavior, but that's when it comes back to that addictive habit. Like it's something they cannot control, even with a severe threat of consequences. And so, oftentimes emotional eaters, when they see a practitioner, there could be a disconnect if you don't understand it, because people they either won't be honest about their eating, right? They won't really come clean about it because they're ashamed of it. But they also might not totally feel a connection with you if you don't understand what they're going through. And in their mind, they're thinking, how would you understand me? And therefore, how there's a disconnect where they won't necessarily even feel motivated to follow through on your advice because they feel like you don't get them, right? And that's why having that information, understanding it, and just being more in relationship to what they're going through is going to be really important, because that disconnect can turn into resistance, right? Or ghosting or whatever.
I'll share a story because I don't think my son will ever listen to this podcast. At least for now, maybe in the future he will. Um, one day Deep and I, we're we're pretty specific with what we eat, and we have certain guidelines around what we eat. And one year, our accountant, I don't know why he does this, but I don't think he'll hear this presentation either, or this conversation. So every year he comes by and he gives us like a box of chocolate and wine. And first of all, we don't eat like milk chocolate and box chocolate and stuff like that. And we don't drink either. So we're like, what do we do with this stuff? So we have like all this wine in our house that I won't even serve it to other people because it just goes against my values. And so I'm like, I don't know what to do with this stuff. And the chocolate we just kind of, put into this cabinet, and we don't gift it to anyone either because obviously that's not what we want to do. And then one day I was playing basketball with my son, and the ball went underneath his bed, and I found the empty box of chocolates. And I was like, it was almost like the equivalent to find like dirty magazines under your kid's bed or something like that, right? It was like the functional medicine wellness practitioner equivalent. And I was just like scratching my head. I'm like, okay, well, I could see like who doesn't like chocolate, who doesn't like the crappy chocolate because it has milk and all kinds of other addictive substances in it. But I was just curious, like, I want to know if I'm, setting the stage for an eating disorder, or if there's anything that I can do to mitigate this. Like, I don't want him to feel like he has to hide that from us. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
and like for him to finish that entire box of chocolates. I mean, we just watched Forrest Gump the other day together, and so it just like making me laugh even more. But I'm
Yeah.
just curious, like as parents, because many of us listening to this might have children. How do we handle something like that, especially when we want the best for our child? We want them to explore and live life, and but at the same time stay healthy. And Deepa always tells me, you can't be overly strict because they're gonna like rebound and like go crazy. And I've seen this happen to people in university who had really strict parents, and
Yeah.
they just become wild animals when they're uncaged and off in university. So
Right. Yeah.
I'd love some, like, this may be a selfish question, but hopefully others can relate. Like, how do we work with children to identify these patterns early? How much of it is just being a kid and being curious? How much of it is emotional? uh, I'd love your insights on that.
It's so hard as parents, and I don't have children, just to be authentic here. I don't have children, but my sisters do, and I do know my middle sister definitely has an emotional eater on her hands, or a food addict on her hands, and it's hard to walk that line. And I think it is a line, maybe somewhere down the middle, where you're not being overly strict. Because yeah, I mean, my mom was a health nut, so to speak. I mean, before, I mean, it was back in the 70s, but she, I wanted the good stuff. And like, we didn't have a lot of good stuff. But I found, like, I used to literally, like, she would make Toll House cookies, like chocolate chip cookies. But I would make cookie dough out of sugar and butter and flour, which is totally gross now. But that, I was like, I had to have my fix. So I'm like, that's the closest I can get. I didn't want to put an egg in it because that was like too involved. But sugar and flour and butter, I made like makeshift cookie dough out of it. So if you have a real sugar addict on your hands, it's like you can't do it right. And I think that's the important thing for parents to know is, you can't really do it right. You can't do it wrong unless, and I would say too much restriction probably isn't good because kids have access to sugar, right? Just like they have access to porn nowadays. And so they can get whatever they want pretty much, and their friends are doing it, eating it. So I think teaching about moderation is going to be really important. Teaching people about listening to their bodies and knowing when they feel full. I mean, these are all just good things to teach your kids. In terms of the secret of eating, I think maybe exploring whether that's happening a lot, or not. But it is hard. I mean, my sister's daughter binges, like she is up late at night eating candy. She's gotten her hand on a whole bag of Hershey's Kisses and she's eating them all, and so, but it's her path, right? And one of my favorite sayings was from my mentor, which is that God doesn't have any grandchildren, meaning we all have a source, right? And we're all like, we all have our own path here. We all have our own path here. And if we end up addicted, well, then we get to deal with it, right? And so we can't put it all off on the parent. It's one of our life lessons we get to deal with. And it's good to start, to overshoot the mark, binge, and then feel like, ugh, that felt terrible. We might learn from that or we might not, just depending. But I think just making sure kids feel like they can talk to their parents about whatever's going on or whatever pain they have. Of course, giving them love as you and Deepa do, and just modeling health is always going to be a good thing, like being a model for it, but maybe, let them know it's, it doesn't have to be a strict thing or black and white thing.
I'm wondering if it would help if we ate some of these things on occasion.
I don't know. I don't, you have to do you, right? You have to do
Yeah.
so long as they know they're okay, or he's okay, if he has cake at the party or whatever, like just, whatever. It's maybe loosening up around what they do when they're not at home or whatever, or having a sweet option, coconut covered dates or something, right? As a goodie at home if they crave sweetness, just a healthy version for them, and you don't have to eat it, but they can,
Yeah, my son just made an apple crumble earlier today.
There you
Uh,
go.
so he definitely enjoys getting his hands dirty in the kitchen,
Yeah,
and
that's great. That's
he
great.
so we have good healthy ingredients to play with and to work with, which is always nice.
Well, you
Um,
certainly gifted him good genes, so that's good,
yeah,
you know.
and those are gifted to me, so
Yeah.
I'll receive that definitely. So tell me, Tricia, like, there's when we're developing meal plans for people, I'm curious where things like cheat meals fit into this, or if that's even a good idea for people who we may suspect have emotional eating as part of their challenge. Would you recommend that, or like when we're prescribing nutrition plans or meal plans to individuals, like what are some suggestions, ideas, or like little hacks that you can offer us
Yeah,
to
it's a
speak to that?
great, yeah, fantastic question. I'm not a fan of cheat meals for my subset, for emotional eaters and food addicts. It's hard for them to go off the reservation and get back to the reservation.
Mm.
Okay, so the opening up the window to binge, for let's say, or have a cheat, something really sweet and yummy, just know that typically they're going to have a hard time getting back on the plan. So I don't recommend it because it could be weeks before they get off of the plan. And there's a lot of people who are emotional eaters who are very black and white thinkers and they want to do it perfectly. And I've talked to people who have done, your guys' metabolic plan who were so good. And then once they went off, they couldn't get back, right? And so and then since they're off, they're like, what the hell, right? There's that black and white thinking. I might as well go all the way. And then they're way off. So I think that's the danger of the cheat idea. And I recommend 3 meals with nothing in between. I call it 3 meal magic. And it's just a really good kind of basic self-caring way to eat, kind of like you'd have your kid eat, right? Like let's make sure you get your meals in so you're not too hungry, so your body's regularly fed, and so that kind of thing. So I think just sort of slow and steady wins the race. Again, for the emotional eater, it's just because then it's just a steady, even plan, and there isn't anything that's special and different that you then have to come back to the plan for, just because it's hard for us to do that. It's hard for us to eat sugar and then stop. We don't stop, give me some
Mm-hmm.
sugar and now I want that, and so it's finding, it has to be a long-term plan. Like I still eat 3 meals and nothing in between, and I've been doing that for 35 years more or less by the grace of God. So it's just like it's become my North Star because it's not wacky or different. Like you have to understand, emotional eaters have been doing diets for a long time, erratic ways of eating. Let me do keto, let me do IF, let me do vegan. It's like we're doing all these different kinds of things. And there's something very calming about just getting down to 3 meals, nothing in between. And that for me, I don't eat desserts because again, if I start eating desserts, I just want the desserts. I don't want my vegetables anymore. And that's not to say they can't. Some of my clients will have a dessert, or the dessert has gotten tamer. But it's just when we're dealing with this kind of person, it is an addictive personality who typically is addicted to sugar. So the cheat days can be problematic for that reason.
Mm. There's an emotional component, which it obviously comes with a chemical component, right? The physiology of addiction. And I'm curious if you've found any supplements that can be supportive, like if we need to support their dopamine or serotonin or amino acid support. Like, have you found any of those to be beneficial
I
for
think
people?
it can be helpful for people. I don't do that because I'm not a nutritionist or clinician, so I don't prescribe supplements along those lines. Anxiety it does run high in emotional eaters, and oftentimes they self-soothe with carbs and sugar. And so doing something that can help them, have more calming effect. I think that's great. That's, neurotransmitter, tune up is always a good thing for sure. Because we do tend to overthink, have racing minds, and anxious and hard to sit still and that kind of thing. It's just important to know that sort of as a class of people, we also just don't want to feel.
Mm.
We just don't want to be with ourselves. And that's a long lived habit. And so that's why I teach meditation to my clients, prayer, writing, things that can help them de-stress. So supplementation's good, but we have to get these people to learn tools that are, just at their fingertips, they can do anytime to learn how to live with less stress. And I will say, since I'm bringing it up, definitely in my programs, in my book, I talk about something called the anatomy of the emotional eater, which is personality traits of the emotional eater, one of which is overdoing and people pleasing, not
Mm.
using our voice. These are all common traits. And this is more around the lifestyle changes people have to make. But the overdoing is huge. And part of it is that we don't want to be with our feelings. So we can be super type A, run companies, get a lot done. And obviously our culture rewards that. But it's really important to know that there is inherent in that kind of behavior. There's, first of all, it goes along, if with emotional eater as an overdoer, it's gonna like contribute to overeating, because stress, right, leads
Mm-hmm.
to stress eating. And lack of self-care is going to lead to stress eating. But the other thing about that is it's going to be hard to follow a food plan when you have no downtime. Like the more stress you're creating, obviously, the more fuel you need to keep that machine running. And so helping people like really prioritize self-care, which I know you guys are huge proponents of as well. It's like everything has to change. Like it can't just be the food that changes, everything has to change. And I often say it's not an eating problem, it's a living problem. The people pleasing is a huge thing to look out for, because emotional eaters thrive on validation, because we typically didn't get it as kids, right? We were in dysfunctional homes and we didn't get good, solid, validation or a strong sense of ourselves. And we're looking outside, like, can you give it to me? Can you give it to me if I do this project? If I, kill myself over here, being the all-star, will I get validation? So that's another way that these are just things that need to be addressed. I mean, this is what I do with my clients. So obviously if a practitioner feels like, whoa, this is a thing, send them to us. We'll help them change their habits, because that's really what I'm doing. Is I don't work on their food. I'm, beyond the 3 meal magic, and it's, the work that I do is a nice complement, right, to what practitioners are doing, because you do the supplements, you do the food plan, and I'll help them actually follow through, because I'll help them, start to make those living changes. Like, it's amazing how many people don't know how to put themselves first, prioritize self-care. They think it's selfish. And I'm sure you see this too. They think it's selfish, not realizing, no, what's selfish is running yourself ragged and having your family get the bitchy, grumpy, sleepy form of you, right? Like version of you. Like that what's selfless is putting yourself and your self-care first, so they get your highest and best self.
Mm. Thank you for sharing that. Do people, we talked about like workaholics and people, really pushing themselves. And I know that sometimes people who are recovering alcoholics become addicted to, food, or they might become addicted to their work, or they might become addicted to exercise and excessive running and things like that.
Yeah.
Um, do you find that to be the case with emotional eating as well? That, maybe they had a history of other addictions and now they've conquered those, but maybe they don't view the food addiction as detrimental as, let's say, smoking or exercise or working.
Yeah. It's, when you have an addictive personality, like, why stop at one? Like, you have it in you to overdo. Like, that's kind of, and again, because we're trying to fix our feelings. And so very typical for alcoholics to start smoking in recovery, or to start eating in recovery, like put the alcohol down, pick the donuts up, and go to any AA meeting. There's a whole lot of like sweet carby foods to eat. And it's a very typical thing. I call it switching deck chairs on the Titanic. You're still going down. Just what chair are you sitting in? And so it's very common. And again, that's why digging deeper into the underlying causes of one's addictive habits is so important. Dealing with those personality traits, really making more fundamental changes, dealing with the trauma and past historical stuff that's happened. I mean, that it just has to be addressed. Otherwise, we're going to be looking for something to do to kill the feelings and to just automatically feel better. So yeah, super typical. I've done it. I've overdone other things and in an attempt to escape my feelings. And it is extremely, an addict is an addict is an addict.
Mm. You're quite prolific. You've done a TEDx talk, you've written a book, you are on podcasts and sharing your message out there with the world. What are some ways that people can follow your work, learn more about what you're doing? Perhaps even invite you to come and speak to their communities if they're practitioners, or interview you for their podcast. What's the best way to get a hold of you and learn more about your work?
Thank you for asking. My book is called Heal Your Hunger, 7 Simple Steps to End Emotional Eating Now. And I have a few other books in the works. But my podcast is also called The Heal Your Hunger Show. My website is healyourhunger.com. And that quiz is on there. And then my Instagram is my personal name, Tricia Nelson _. So those are the primary things I'd say of ways people, I mean, my website kind of has it all on there, healyourhunger.com. And then we'll provide some links too. So
Yeah. And then I think if people are interested, if practitioners are interested in promoting your work, becoming affiliates, they can go to healyourhunger.com/Sachin, sign
yes.
up as an affiliate, and then, promote the work that you're doing, or, share it with their clients, get your books into their
Yeah,
practices, share your TED talk. I think that could be a great starting point for a lot of people. Uh,
absolutely.
I know you've done a ton of interviews. Like, what's a question that nobody's asked you that you wish somebody would ask you?
Um, Well, I'll give you something that a client just asked me. I often talk about emotional eating as a condition instead of a like 12-step vernacular is like a disease. I don't really like that word. And addiction, of course, people have an issue with, but a condition, I like calling it a condition. Like I call it a condition often in the work that I do, and and I like that word. It's softer, obviously. It's not triggering, but it's also great because it goes both ways. Like the condition of emotional eating, um, it comes from having a condition of stress, a condition of overworking, a condition of not feeling your feelings, right? It's sort of a way of being, a way of reacting to life and stressors. And so I like calling it a condition because conversely, when you're healing, it's a condition, you're also in a certain condition as well, a condition of self-care, a condition of slowing down and being more present, a condition of, healthy eating and healthy sleep, right? So it's sort of like, it's so easy to think of food as the problem. Like, I need to change my food, I need to change my eating, but it's a symptom, right? It's absolutely a symptom of, my condition. It's a symptom of my condition. And so if my condition is one of health and healthy thinking and processing of my emotions, my eating is going to be a symptom of that. If I'm in anger and fear and resentment and exhaustion and overachievement, eating will be a symptom of my eating will show up as a symptom of that. Oops, can't hear you.
I know each case is probably going to be a little bit different, but how long would it take for someone to recover? Like, when do they start seeing the shifts or noticing the improvements? And I know you started off the call by saying, or the interview rather, by saying that you're still an emotional eater and you could easily fall back into that. So maybe you could talk to that. Like, what is the timeline of recovery for people, if that is the right word? And what are things that would throw somebody into like a relapse?
I definitely don't consider myself cured, and that's kind of more like along the 12-step, A lines as well. And I think that, I mean, I know that from personal experience because I have gone back to it. Like I didn't have 35 straight years of not overeating. There were, some dips there for sure. Again, based on my condition, if I wasn't addressing my feelings, if I wasn't meditating, if I wasn't dealing with fear and hard things that might have come up in my life, the food it's hard. I mean, you have to eat, right? You have to eat. And so to me, you have to dig deeper as an emotional eater than you do if you're an alcoholic who just stays away from alcohol, because you have to deal with the food, which means you have to be more on top of your condition. So, but that said, Sachin, I mean, my clients, when they join my program, they like within a week or two are already making really significant changes. First of all, community is vital for people to change their eating habits. Like you have to be around other emotional eaters because you feel like you're already suffering from a case of feeling strange and different. Like I can't follow the diet. I can't follow the food plan. What's wrong with me? I'm the only one who can't do it, right? Is what we tell ourselves. I'm such a loser. I mean, I used to call myself a loser, you know,
Mm.
and because I saw everybody else following the diet and I couldn't do it. And so to be amongst people who couldn't follow the diet either is very healing just off the bat, right? Like it's to know you're not the only one, that you've blown a ton of diets or whatever. That's super helpful and healing. Just community. Community is soul food, and we do our program in groups. You know, I mean, there's a step-by-step process, online modules, and all that, but then we do the Zoom community, and I know you guys do that too. It's just so, even when you're a practitioner, right? Like up leveling your practice, it helps to be around other practitioners. So community is vital. And so that alone is helpful when people are coming out of the darkness of shame around their binging, because we never binge around other people. It's always a secretive affair, you know? And so just being with other bingers and realizing you're not the only one is healing in and of itself. So there's an immediate hit from that identification. But then the 3 meal magic is super helpful. Like that's revolutionary for some of these people who have been snackers like forever. Like they're like constant grazers. So just like getting it down to 3 meals can be really like life changing for somebody. And then going through the process of self-care, like implementing self-care habits when you've been burning the candle at both ends and feeling like that makes you a good citizen, and not realizing that it's also wrecking your health and making you a, you know, an ineffective citizen. So there's a lot of changes that right out of the gate are going to really change somebody. But it does take time to have it become a habit. You know, like it's definitely definitely takes more than 21 days to build a habit if you've been doing that habit for 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like it really depends on how long you've been doing it. So we're building a habit, and self-sabotage is super um uh prominent for people who struggle with food and weight. Like they've been sabotaging forever. And I do speak into that for people. There's a lot that can be done around the self-sabotaging habits as well. First of all, by recognizing the thoughts, the self-sabotaging thoughts that go along with the binge, you know, or the going back to the old ways. But, you know, I often say it's kind of like turning around a big freighter. You know, you've got all this weight going in this direction in the ocean. You know, it's not like a 20-foot skiff that's just going to turn with an outboard motor. Like it has to slow down first before it can even start to turn and then go in the opposite direction. So it takes time. How much time? It depends. I mean, I have a 90-day program where people are markedly different after 90 days. Some of Deepa's has referred people who have gone through my 90-day program. But even then, like it's still, we're changing a lifelong addictive habit, you know. So I consider myself not cured. I'm still on the path. But also ultimately it is a spiritual path as well. It's not just changing your eating habits, it's changing how you react to life, right? It's changing your perspective on problems that come up and seeing the lessons in them. You know, it could be changing your relationships. You know, if relationships are continuously stressful or dysfunctional, you know, we need to take a look at that too. But that comes with time. Like that's never the first step for somebody. That's just when they've built, you know, they've built self-awareness, right? When they've developed habits of self-care, you know, and their consciousness is raising, everything is, you know, ensues after that. Like you realize, oh, I could have an up level here. Oh, I'm not making what I should be making in my job. It's just like when you get better from the inside, everything gets better.
Mm. I love that. Uh, Now I'm curious, uh, if how do you approach somebody if you're suspecting they're an emotional eater? Like, is there a language that you approach them with? Are they self-aware that they're an emotional eater, or is it something that, you know, could create a riff in the relationship with that person. So I'm just curious as to how you would bring that up with somebody if you're suspecting they're an emotional eater.
Yeah, that's an awesome question. If they have language around their weight, like if they're complaining about their weight, obviously that's an in, right? And I will say anybody who's been dieting for any length of time, they have failed so many times that they're super discouraged and afraid to hope. And they also don't know there's a back door, and the back door is addressing emotional eating. They're used to the diet and exercise solution, and they've tried it umpteenth times. And so they're like, that doesn't, they feel like they're hopeless. Like, that's not going to work for me. But the back door is the emotional eating. So it's a different tack. So if somebody has opened the door by complaining about their weight, I advise people to say, hey, do you know there's a different way? Like, it doesn't have to be the diet and exercise solution. It could be that, addressing your relationship with food. So to me, that's just a little twist that you could offer somebody. So in their mind, they're not saying, oh, I tried that, it didn't work. Because typically they're not changing their relationship with food. They haven't tried addressing emotional eating. That's typically not, people think diet and exercise, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's one little way. That's a kind of a hook, like, hey, there is another way. Like, I understand these things haven't worked. Have you tried this? And so that's a no. um I also will say my book is a great way for people to self-select. My book is not about weight loss, right? My book is about emotional eating. And as you started out the show saying, I mean, it doesn't matter what weight you are, you still could have frankly, I think we all can be emotional eaters, right? Like, I think we're hardwired to have an emotional connection with food. It's just, again, on the spectrum of emotional eating, where are you on that spectrum? But my book, Heal Your Hunger, is a great way for people to, first of all, hear my very candid story about my own experience so that nobody's wagging their finger at them, and so they can relate or not relate. So that's helpful. I tell doctors, like, have a book in your office, that people can pick up or whatever. And so that can be helpful because then people can read that. It's very um it's a book for good living. Teaches them about meditation and prayer and people, like, stopping people pleasing, things we could all use, and so it's not a direct you need to lose weight and here's how to do it book. So that
Hmm.
can be helpful as well. If there's no opening, if somebody isn't complaining about their weight or whatever, again, the book still might be a good thing. TEDx talk could be a helpful thing. But if they haven't given you an opening, it's harder. You can say, I have a friend who has changed her life, right? And the way she relates with food. And again, I do feel like we could all use that a little bit at least. So again, it's not, you need to lose weight.
Hmm. I love it. Tricia, this has been awesome. I really always enjoy our conversations. You have
Me
so much
too.
insight to offer. And for the clinicians, for all of you that are listening, we'll share the link in the show notes to where you can go to become an affiliate, to where you can download Tricia's quiz, and she'll give us a link to the forms as well, so you can potentially incorporate that into your intake process to make sure you're not missing something like this. Because at the end of the day, we're all in this to help people, and sometimes we have the tools, and sometimes we may need to find somebody else who has tools that can be supportive in the ultimate objective to help this person feel whole again. And food is something that we all have to do. So it's not like alcohol, you could just quit it, or smoking, you can quit it. It's an absolute necessity. And because we have to do it at least, maybe 2-3 times a day, it's important that we help people navigate this, because then we're helping them develop a lifelong capability and skill set that will serve them, and hopefully even serve future generations to come, if they can model appropriate behavior around food for their families moving forward. So important work that you're doing. Thank you for
Thank
everything that
you.
you do. Thank you for being you, and thanks for walking this path, and being willing to share your story and journey with all of us. Much
Thank,
love,
thank
so
you,
much
Stefan.
gratitude.
Back
Oh,
at
my
you.
pleasure. My pleasure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Appreciate
Um,
you.
I appreciate you as well. So thank you again. And thank you to all of you who tuned in and listened. check out the show notes, get the additional information, tools, and resources. And if you need some help in this area, Tricia is your person. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye for now.